do I get a better bass tone? I've been trying to find my sound, and that's from Alex 2002.
It's a great question, and I'm going to, because as a bass player, I picked this question as well because being a bass player, it's something I could bring value to, but I want this to be about sound in general, because this is something that I have been involved in for a long time, not just as a bass player, but as a bass teacher. So I started as a bass teacher in the 1990s, the late 1990s. When I was 19, I've been a bass teacher for a long time, done thousands of gigs. Tone is very, very important to me, and having taught thousands of students with different guitars, with different gear, there are a few things that I would say, and it goes the same thing with guitar, and it goes the same thing as anything else. Firstly, I would say, I'm going to pick up a guitar. This is an electric instrument, but it has acoustic properties, okay? Now this is very, very important for any instrument. Same thing with drums, same thing with guitar, same thing with anything else. It's all about the acoustic properties, which means if I play a note, just with my fingers, if I play it harder, you get different frequencies. There's more mid frequencies that come punching out of this guitar. So before we start worrying about gear and spending thousands of pounds on gear, let's actually worry about technique. Let's worry about right hand technique, left hand technique, understanding the knowledge of how to make this thing sound good with these babies, these bad boys, before we start worrying too much about, about amps. Put that there. Before we start worrying about amps or effects or guitars, because whilst they do make some difference, they are minimal. These are the first and foremost line of your weapons when it comes to being a musician. Then after that, we start looking at your instruments that you're going to play. Now that bass is probably worth about £2.5 grand. It's a 1976 Fender P bass. However, I also have a fake, yes, that's right, not Squire, a fake Fender Jazz bass, which I bought for 120 quid. And I love it, it's amazing. You don't need to have expensive instruments, but you do need to have the right type of instrument. And for me, I like a heavy guitar because that's where the sound comes from. That's where you get all the low end of the bass. So are you going to play with your pick? Are you going to play with fingers? What guitar are you going to use? You don't need loads and loads of guitars, but you do need how to get the right sound. And the amount of times that someone will have come to me with some piece of £1,000 piece of shit driftwood guitar that I'll go, I'm really sorry, it's just a shit guitar. And then they tell me why I'm wrong and why the guitar's amazing. But you know, you go and check out through the annals of history, you go and check out the guitars, the basses that are used live, that are used in the studio, and you will see a thread of very similar guitars, and it will come back to those classics depending on what music you're in. And if you're going down a funk guitar, you're probably going to have a Strat, and if you're going to have a punk bass player, it's probably going to be a P bass. And so whilst there are options, you will see these threads of similarity amongst instruments. When it comes down to modern day bass sounds in an amp or guitar sounds in an amp, how can you possibly replace the sound of a big valve amp? How can you do that? You know, yes, there's Kempers, which are, you know, I'm on the side of they're getting better and better and they're really good. I know people don't like them, but you know, that big valve amp sound, when you're going to go on tour, I use orange AD200s, which is basically an orange bass amp. I have two AD200 bass heads and two Ampeg cabs, getting technical now. I used to use all Ampeg stuff. It used to blow up a lot. Orange stuff just doesn't blow up. But for me, it's more about having something that moves air. I learned this from Bruce. It's about moving air because that's where the sound comes from. And so if you've got something that you can crank up and move some air, that usually makes a big difference. But we're getting into technical stuff now. The most important thing is these, and that's the same thing with drums, guitar, violin, bass, your voice, everything, not voice with these, everything is about how you're actually playing the instrument with yourself. Then after that, we need to look at the techniques of, are you in time? Because that is a big part of your bass sound. Are you in time? How is your feel? Are you playing slightly behind the beat? Are you pushing the beat? Are you playing bang on the beat? What's the feel like of your bass playing, of your guitar playing, of your drumming? What are the parts that you're playing? Are you overcomplicating things? These are the way you get more power in your sound. And then lastly, once you've got some good gear, some decent gear, the last thing you need to do is get out there and you need to be gigging a lot. If you are a musician, and you are not gigging on Saturday, I have a question for you. Why are you not gigging? And if you say money, then I poo-poo that, Because for me, if you're not gigging, if you're a musician and you're not gigging, first and foremost, if you're a musician, first and foremost, that's your thing, and you're not gigging on Saturday, in my opinion, you're doing it wrong. Harsh, but